"Anderson, get down." Edith's scream tore through the darkness a fraction of a second before Barrister Williams pulled the trigger. Anderson threw himself behind the open door of his car as the bullet struck the metal frame where his chest had been moments earlier. The impact shattered the side window, spraying broken glass across the gravel. Before Anderson could fully understand what had happened, a second shot cut through the air and buried itself in the bonnet. The old Williams family estate, once a symbol of wealth and respect, had become a battlefield. Its broken windows stared into the night like empty eyes. Weeds had swallowed the gardens. Mist drifted between the trees, and the private ambulance stood beneath the ruined entrance with its rear doors open. Edith lay strapped to a stretcher beside the vehicle, still wearing her pale hospital gown. Her mother stood beside her, terrified but refusing to release her daughter's hand. Two armed men guarded them while Barrister Williams remained near the mansion steps, his weapon pointed towards Anderson's car. Anderson crouched behind the door and looked towards Edith. She was alive, but even from a distance he could see the strain in her face. Her breathing was shallow, and one hand rested protectively over her stomach. The journey from the hospital had exhausted her. The baby had already survived 2 medical emergencies, and now Edith had been dragged into the cold night by the man Anderson once trusted with every secret his family possessed. Barrister Williams called out from the darkness. "Leave the car slowly, Anderson. Keep your hands where I can see them." Anderson stayed behind the door. "Release Edith and her mother first." The lawyer laughed quietly. "You are still trying to negotiate as though this is one of your board meetings. You have no power here. You needed me to bring the memory card. That gives me power. It gives you a few more minutes." Anderson had not come completely unprepared. Before leaving the hospital, the independent officers had placed a small recording device beneath the collar of his shirt. His car was being followed at a distance, but Barrister Williams had chosen the estate carefully. The surrounding land belonged to old Williams companies, and the nearest public road was several kilometers away. Signal interference equipment hidden somewhere on the property had disrupted Anderson's phone shortly before he arrived. He did not know whether the police could still hear him or whether he was completely alone. Edith watched him from the stretcher. She understood enough to know that Anderson was trying to delay the lawyer. She also knew he could not continue hiding behind the car forever. Barrister Williams had armed men beside her mother, and one careless movement could turn the situation into a massacre. She looked towards the guard standing closest to her. He was broad-shouldered and nervous, with one hand wrapped tightly around his weapon. Unlike Barrister Williams, he did not appear comfortable with what was happening. His eyes moved constantly between Anderson, Edith, and the trees. The second guard looked colder. He stood near Edith's mother and kept his finger close to the trigger. Edith remembered her father's lessons. He had taught her that panic narrowed a person's vision until they saw only the danger in front of them. Staying calm did not remove the danger. It allowed a person to notice the small weaknesses fear tried to hide. The strap around Edith's left wrist was not completely secure. The men had moved her quickly from the ambulance, and one buckle had caught against the blanket instead of locking properly. She began moving her fingers slowly, testing the space without drawing attention. Barrister Williams called to Anderson again. "Place the memory card on the ground and walk towards me." Anderson answered, "You will kill us the moment you have it. If I wanted Edith dead, she would never have left the hospital alive. You disconnected her from medical care while she was carrying a child whose heartbeat had already failed twice. You knew exactly what could happen." Barrister Williams' face hardened. "I kept the necessary equipment in the ambulance. You kept her alive because you needed control over me. At last, you are beginning to understand how power works." Anderson looked past him towards Edith. Their eyes met across the distance. He saw fear in her face, but he also saw determination. She gave the smallest possible shake of her head, silently warning him not to surrender the evidence too quickly. The lawyer raised his weapon again. "Step out now, or one of my men will demonstrate how serious I am." The colder guard moved his gun towards Edith's mother. Anderson immediately stood from behind the car with both hands visible. Broken glass fell from his suit as he stepped into the open. His face remained controlled, but every part of him wanted to run towards Edith. Barrister Williams searched him from a distance. "Where is the card?" "In my inside pocket." "Remove it slowly." Anderson reached into his jacket and took out a small black memory card. He held it between his fingers. The lawyer smiled. "The final mistake of your father's life placed inside something smaller than a fingernail. My father made many mistakes. Trusting you was the greatest. The smile disappeared from Barrister Williams' face. Your father understood the world better than you ever did. He simply lost the courage to accept what was necessary. He discovered you were using his company to protect criminals. He discovered that companies of that size are built on agreements respectable men pretend not to see. You left Officer Johnson without treatment. I prevented one police officer from destroying thousands of lives. Edith's mother looked at the lawyer with disbelief. You murdered my husband to protect a company? Barrister Williams turned towards her. Your husband was given an opportunity to live comfortably. He could have accepted compensation, resigned, and taken care of his family. He was dying in a clinic. That happened later. You speak about him as though his life was a line inside a contract. To me, every crisis was a contract. That is why the Williams family survived. Anderson took one slow step forward. You did not protect my family. You infected it. The lawyer gestured with his gun. Stop there. Anderson obeyed. Barrister Williams looked towards the memory card. Place it on the ground. Anderson bent slowly and placed the card on the gravel. Kick it towards me. Anderson moved his foot behind a small object but did not kick it. First, release Edith's mother. The colder guard struck Edith's mother across the shoulder with the side of his weapon. She cried out and fell against the ambulance. Edith screamed, "Leave her alone." Anderson's control almost broke. He stepped forward instinctively, but Barrister Williams fired another shot into the ground near his feet. Do not test me, the lawyer warned. Kick the card. Edith's mother straightened herself despite the pain. She looked at Anderson and said, "Do not give him anything for me. My husband died protecting the truth. I will not help bury it again." Barrister Williams turned towards her with irritation. Courage seems to run through your family at the most inconvenient moments. Anderson kicked the card across the gravel. It stopped halfway between them. The nervous guard moved to retrieve it. As he bent down, Edith loosened the strap around her wrist another inch. Her mother noticed the movement but wisely kept her face turned towards Barrister Williams. The guard picked up the card and carried it to the lawyer. Barrister Williams examined it beneath the ambulance light. He had no way of knowing whether it contained the original files, but he had spent years reading Anderson's behavior. He believed the billionaire's love for Edith would prevent him from risking a trick. Where are the other copies? He asked. There are no other copies. You created 3 before opening the original. Anderson's expression did not change. Barrister Williams smiled. You see, Anderson, I still know what happens around you before you do. You had someone inside the hospital. I had people everywhere. Hospitals, police departments, private security companies, and your own offices. Your father taught me that one loyal person was useful, but 10 frightened people were better. The independent police already have the files. The police have fragments. I know which evidence matters and which pieces can be challenged. You are surrounded by witnesses now. Barrister Williams looked towards his armed men. Witnesses can change their memories. The nervous guard lowered his eyes. The lawyer noticed. Is there a problem? No, sir. Then watch the woman. The guard returned to Edith's side. Barrister Williams held the memory card up. We are going inside. Anderson will make a final recording. He will explain that his father created the protection network, that Margaret continued it, and that Officer Johnson's death was an unfortunate result of an unauthorized company operation. Anderson will accept responsibility for hiding the truth after discovering it. Edith stared at him. You want him to confess to your crimes. I want history to contain a version powerful enough to survive. And then what? Barrister Williams looked at her calmly. Then an argument will occur. Anderson will become unstable after learning the truth about his father. A weapon will be fired. By sunrise, the world will believe grief destroyed the Williams family. Anderson finally understood. The lawyer had never planned to exchange Edith for the memory card. He wanted to kill all 3 of them and create a story that protected himself. You cannot explain the baby, Anderson said. Barrister Williams glanced towards Edith's stomach. A tragic casualty. The words changed something inside the nervous guard. He looked at Edith, then at the lawyer, as though he had only now accepted that an unborn child would also be killed. His hesitation lasted less than a second, but Edith saw it. Barrister Williams ordered the men to move everyone inside the mansion. The colder guard grabbed Edith's mother by the arm and pushed her towards the entrance. The nervous guard released the stretcher brakes and began rolling Edith behind them. Anderson walked several meters away with the lawyer's gun aimed at his back. The ruined entrance opened into a large hall, covered in dust. Torn curtains moved through broken windows. Old portraits hung crookedly on the walls, and pieces of furniture remained beneath white sheets. Anderson remembered visiting the estate as a child. His father used to bring important guests there when conversations needed to remain private. Anderson had once thought the mansion represented stability and family history. Now every hallway seemed to contain evidence of the secrets his father had allowed to grow. Barrister Williams led them towards the old study. The room still contained a heavy wooden desk, several bookcases, and a large family portrait above the fireplace. Anderson's father stood in the center of the painting, one hand resting on young Anderson's shoulder. Aunt Margaret and Anderson's mother stood nearby. Barrister Williams had attended the event when the portrait was revealed, but he did not appear in the painting. He had always preferred to remain outside the frame while controlling what happened inside it. The lawyer ordered Anderson to sit behind his father's desk. One guard placed Edith's stretcher near the fireplace while the other forced her mother into a chair. Barrister Williams set a small camera on a tripod, placed several documents in front of Anderson. "You will read the statement exactly as written." Anderson examined the first page. It blamed the protection network on his father and Margaret while claiming Barrister Williams had discovered the truth only recently. It also stated that Anderson had attempted to suppress Officer Johnson's evidence to protect Williams' holdings. "No one will believe this. They will when the statement appears beside your signature, the forged company payments, and the bodies inside this room. The memory card proves otherwise." Barrister Williams inserted the card into a laptop on the desk. The screen displayed an empty folder. His expression changed. Anderson watched him quietly. The lawyer removed the card and inserted it again. Nothing appeared. "You brought me a blank card. I brought you exactly what you deserved." Barrister Williams struck Anderson across the face with the back of his hand. Edith shouted his name, but Anderson remained seated. Blood appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Where is the real card?" "Safe." "Where?" "Somewhere you will never reach." Barrister Williams placed the gun against Anderson's forehead. "You believe I will hesitate because Edith is watching?" "No. I believe you will hesitate because killing me without the evidence gives you nothing. The independent investigators already know your name. Sonia has confessed. My father's recording identifies you. The contractors you sent to the false storage site were arrested with messages from counsel. Even if everyone in this room dies, you will spend the rest of your life running." For the first time, genuine anger broke through the lawyer's calm expression. "Your father also thought evidence would protect him." Anderson's eyes narrowed. "What did you do to him?" Barrister Williams stepped back. He realized he had said too much, but the power he felt inside the old study made him careless. The mansion had been the place where Anderson's father once relied on him. Standing there again, the lawyer wanted Anderson to understand how thoroughly his family had been defeated. "Your father developed a conscience too late," he said. By then, the network included ministers, police commanders, judges, doctors, and businessmen. Closing it would have exposed every settlement he approved during the early years. He wanted to confess privately and protect you from the consequences. And you stopped him. I gave him opportunities to reconsider. You killed him. Barrister Williams did not answer immediately. Edith's mother looked between them. Even the armed guards seemed to be listening more closely. The lawyer finally said, "Your father had a heart condition. Everyone knew that. You changed his medication. I ensured his body did what fear had already begun." Anderson rose from the chair, but the colder guard pointed his weapon at Edith. Barrister Williams smiled. "Sit down." Anderson slowly returned to the chair. The rage in his eyes had become almost impossible to contain. The lawyer continued. "Your father recorded his accusations because he no longer trusted anyone. Margaret found one of the files after his death, but I convinced her that exposing it would send you to prison. She believed using your signature made you legally vulnerable. For years, guilt kept her obedient. You murdered my father and used my name to silence the people who knew. I preserved what he built. You preserved yourself." Barrister Williams leaned towards him. "Do you think Williams' holdings became powerful because every decision was clean? Your father opened the first door. I simply walked farther than he had the courage to go. The recording device beneath Anderson's collar was still active, but the signal jammer inside the mansion prevented transmission. Anderson did not know whether it stored the audio locally. He needed time for the independent officers to reach them, but he also knew Barrister Williams might discover the device during a search. Edith continued working her hand free. The strap finally slipped over her wrist, but she kept her arm beneath the blanket. The nervous guard stood beside her, avoiding eye contact. She whispered, "You do not want to be part of this." He pretended not to hear. "Your hands are shaking. Be quiet. You were hired to frighten people, not kill a pregnant woman." The guard swallowed. The colder man noticed the whispering. "What is she saying?" "Nothing." Barrister Williams looked towards them. "Check her restraints." The nervous guard leaned over Edith. Instead of tightening the loose strap, he covered her free wrist with the blanket and whispered, "Do not move yet." Edith understood. The man was afraid, but he had not completely surrendered his conscience. Barrister Williams returned his attention to Anderson. He placed the written confession in front of him and ordered the camera switched on. "You will read." Anderson looked at the lens. "And if I refuse?" The lawyer turned his weapon towards Edith's mother. Anderson's face changed. Edith's mother spoke before he could agree. "Do not read it. I already lost my husband to this man's lies. I will not watch him use my life to destroy the truth." Barrister Williams struck her across the face. Edith pulled against the remaining strap. "Touch her again, and I swear." "You will do what?" the lawyer asked. "You are barely strong enough to sit." Edith stared at him with tears and fury. "My father was injured and still tried to protect the truth. Do not confuse weakness in the body with weakness in the heart." Barrister Williams smiled coldly. "That kind of courage is exactly why your father died." The statement affected the nervous guard more deeply than anything else. He lowered his weapon slightly. Anderson saw it. Barrister Williams returned to the camera and pressed the record button. "Begin." Anderson picked up the statement. He looked down at the words for several seconds and then raised his eyes towards the lens. "My name is Anderson Williams," he began. "For most of my life, I believed wealth gave a man the power to protect the people he loved. I was wrong." Barrister Williams narrowed his eyes. That was not the written statement. Anderson continued, "Real protection does not hide crimes. It does not purchase silence or place a family name above another person's life. My father helped create a system that was later used by Barrister Williams to manipulate police records, private clinics, and company accounts." The lawyer reached towards the camera. At that moment, Edith ripped her free hand from beneath the blanket and grabbed the metal four-pole beside the stretcher. She swung it into the nervous guard's weapon, knocking the barrel away from her. The gun fired into the ceiling. The explosion of sound threw the room into chaos. Edith's mother pushed her chair backwards into the colder guard's knees. Anderson launched himself across the desk and struck Barrister Williams before the lawyer could aim. The tripod crashed to the floor, but the camera continued recording from beneath the edge of the desk. The nervous guard stepped away from Edith and raised both hands, shouting that he was finished. The colder guard recovered quickly and aimed towards Anderson. Before he could fire, Edith's mother grabbed his arm. The weapon discharged into the wall. Anderson and Barrister Williams crashed against the bookcase. The lawyer struck Anderson's injured face and reached for the gun that had fallen beneath the desk. Anderson grabbed his wrist, but the older man fought with the desperation of someone who understood that losing control meant losing everything. The colder guard threw Edith's mother onto the floor and turned towards the stretcher. Edith raised the four-pole again, but pain moved through her stomach so suddenly that her grip weakened. The guard lifted his weapon. The nervous man tackled him from the side. Both guards crashed through a small table. Their weapons slid across the carpet. The colder man struck the other guard repeatedly, shouting that they would all be killed if Barrister Williams lost. The nervous guard responded that he would rather face prison than murder a woman and her baby. Anderson forced Barrister Williams against the wall, but the lawyer drove his knee into Anderson's stomach and broke free. He reached beneath his medical coat and pulled out a second handgun. Enough. Everyone stopped. Barrister Williams pointed the weapon towards Edith. Anderson raised his hands. The lawyer's breathing was no longer calm. Blood ran from a cut above his eyebrow, and the careful appearance he had maintained for years had disappeared. You destroyed everything, he said to Anderson. No. You destroyed it when you believed every human life had a price. Move away from the desk. Anderson obeyed. The colder guard pushed the nervous man to the floor and recovered one of the weapons. Edith's mother crawled towards her daughter, but he blocked her path. Barrister Williams looked at the laptop, then at the blank memory card. The original files. Where are they? Anderson remained silent. The lawyer aimed at Edith's stomach. Edith's mother screamed. Anderson immediately said, "The card is inside Officer Johnson's brass key." Barrister Williams paused. Anderson continued. The key Margaret recovered was not solid. The police opened it and found a storage chip inside. It was a lie, but Barrister Williams did not know that. Where is the key? In my car. The lawyer studied him. You expect me to believe you left the evidence outside? I expected you to search me for a card, not an old key. Barrister Williams motioned towards the colder guard. Take him. Bring the key. The nervous guard remained on the floor with blood on his lip. Edith looked towards him. He was conscious, but the colder man had taken his weapon. Anderson was forced out of the study with the gun pressed against his back. Barrister Williams stayed behind with Edith and her mother, unwilling to leave his hostages unguarded. As Anderson moved through the hallway, he heard a faint sound beneath the mansion, the distant vibration of something heavy striking metal. The independent officers might have reached the property, or it could have been part of the old building settling. He could not risk reacting. Outside, the colder guard ordered him towards the car. Anderson walked slowly. The night had become quieter, but near the tree line, he noticed a brief reflection against the mist. Someone was moving between the ruins of the old garden wall. The police had arrived. Anderson reached the car and opened the passenger door. He leaned inside as though searching the compartment. The guard stood several steps behind him. Move faster. Anderson opened the glove box and removed Officer Johnson's brass key. The guard held out his hand. Anderson looked at him. You know, he will kill you after this. Give me the key. The nervous man inside finally understood. You still have time. The guard stepped closer. I said, give it to me. Anderson tossed the key onto the ground between them. As the guard bent down, a red laser appeared briefly across his weapon. A voice came from the darkness. Police. Drop the gun. The guard turned and fired towards the trees. Several officers responded. The gunshot struck the guard's shoulder, spinning him onto the gravel. Anderson dropped behind the car as police moved from the garden wall. The state's signal jammer had delayed them, but Sonia had provided the original property plans during questioning. The plans revealed an old service tunnel used by staff decades earlier. Independent officers entered through the abandoned gatehouse and reached the gardens without passing the main road. Inside the mansion, Barrister Williams heard the gunfire. He grabbed Edith's stretcher and began pushing it towards a side corridor. Edith's mother tried to follow, but the lawyer pointed his weapon at her. Stay where you are. You will not take my daughter. Then come with us. The nervous guard stood unsteadily and moved towards Edith's mother. Instead of restraining her, he whispered, Follow me when he turns. Barrister Williams heard the movement. What are you doing? The guard raised his empty hands. This is over. The police are here. The lawyer fired. The bullet struck the guard in the upper chest and threw him backwards. Edith screamed as he collapsed. Barrister Williams continued pushing the stretcher down the corridor. Edith's mother ran after them, but the lawyer slammed a heavy door between the hallway sections and locked it from the other side. He knew the estate better than the police. During Anderson's father's lifetime, Barrister Williams had attended secret meetings there and helped create several escape routes. The corridor led towards a private chapel connected to an underground passage and an old boathouse beyond the property. Edith gripped the side of the stretcher as pain tightened across her stomach again. She felt warmth beneath the blanket and feared the bleeding had returned. Barrister Williams noticed her expression. Do not create another problem. My baby may be in danger. Then remain calm. You kidnapped me from a hospital, aimed a gun at Anderson, and shot your own man. Do you truly believe calm is possible? The lawyer pushed the stretcher faster. Behind them, police entered the mansion. Anderson ran towards the study and found Edith's mother kneeling beside the wounded guard. Officers immediately began first aid. The man was still breathing. Where is Edith? Anderson asked. Her mother pointed towards the locked corridor. He took her. Anderson tried the door, but it would not open. Sonia's estate plan showed another route through the old dining hall. Anderson moved with 2 officers while Edith's mother remained with the injured guard. The police commander who had worked with Barrister Williams had also arrived at the estate, pretending to support the rescue. He approached from the front entrance with several uniformed officers under his control. The independent team had not yet arrested him because they wanted proof of his direct involvement. When he heard Barrister Williams had moved towards the chapel, the commander secretly sent a message warning him that the tunnel exit was being watched. He then ordered his officers towards the wrong side of the building. One independent officer noticed the message reflected on the commander's screen. The commander realized he had been seen. He reached for his weapon, but the officer struck his arm aside. A shot tore through a portrait in the hallway. The commander tried to escape, yet 2 officers restrained him before he reached the entrance. His phone contained years of messages with Barrister Williams. The official investigation had been compromised exactly as Margaret warned. Anderson reached the chapel through the dining hall. The room had once been beautiful, but sections of the roof had collapsed. Moonlight fell across broken benches and a dusty wooden altar. At the far end, a narrow door stood open. A trail of blood marked the floor beside the stretcher wheels. Edith. Her voice came faintly from below. Anderson. He ran towards the door, but an officer stopped him. The stairs beyond it descended into complete darkness. We go first. That is my fiancé, and he wants you emotional. Let us clear the tunnel. Anderson knew the officer was right, but waiting felt impossible. They moved down the narrow stairs together, their lights cutting across damp stone walls. Barrister Williams had reached the tunnel beneath the chapel. The passage was barely wide enough for the stretcher, forcing him to abandon it. He unlocked Edith's restraints and ordered her to stand. I cannot walk that far. You will. My baby. He grabbed her arm and pulled her upright. Pain moved through Edith so sharply that she nearly collapsed. She held the wall with one hand and her stomach with the other. The bleeding was light but real. Barrister Williams saw it and swore beneath his breath. He needed her alive until Anderson followed, but the situation was becoming harder to control. He placed one arm around her and pressed the weapon against her side. Move. They continued through the tunnel. Edith forced herself to place one foot in front of the other, remembering the times her father had made her drive through difficult conditions. He used to tell her that survival was sometimes measured in meters, not miles. She did not need enough strength to escape the entire estate. She needed enough strength to reach the next opportunity. Behind them, lights appeared at the far end. Barrister Williams pulled Edith into a side chamber and turned off his torch. He held a gun against her neck and waited while the officers approached. Anderson's voice echoed through the tunnel. Barrister, this ends now. The lawyer replied from the darkness. Send the officers back. You are trapped. I have Edith. Anderson stopped. The officers moved into protective positions. Barrister Williams called out, walk towards my voice alone. The lead officer shook his head, but Anderson began moving. Stop, Edith shouted. He is standing inside a side chamber on your left. Barrister Williams struck her across the face. Anderson heard the impact and moved faster. The lawyer fired towards the tunnel. The bullet struck the stone wall beside Anderson, scattering fragments across his shoulder. Officers returned fire towards the chamber entrance, forcing Barrister Williams deeper inside. He pulled Edith through another narrow opening that led towards the old wine cellar beneath the mansion. Anderson and the officers followed. The cellar contained rows of empty racks, broken barrels, and a rusted metal staircase leading towards the rear courtyard. Barrister Williams pushed Edith towards the steps, but she suddenly stopped moving. I cannot. You can. She looked down at the blood on her gown. The baby is coming. The lawyer stared at her. Another contraction moved through Edith's body. She bent forward, gripping the railing. Her pregnancy was not full term. The doctors had warned that another emergency might force an early delivery. Now far from medical care, her body was beginning a process neither she nor the baby might survive. Barrister Williams looked towards the tunnel behind them. Anderson was close. For the first time, the lawyer appeared uncertain. He understood contracts, evidence, and fear. He did not understand childbirth or how quickly Edith's condition could become fatal. "Move," he repeated, but his voice had lost its certainty. Edith raised her eyes towards him. "You said everything you did protected thousands of lives. Here is one life in front of you. Help me." Barrister Williams looked away. "You never cared about lives," she continued. "You cared about controlling which lives mattered. Be quiet. My father begged for treatment, and you delayed it. Anderson's father tried to expose you, and you killed him. Now you are watching another innocent child suffer because you cannot accept losing." The lawyer's face tightened. "Your father could have walked away. He was a police officer. He was a fool. No, he was everything you were too afraid to become." Barrister Williams raised a gun. A voice came from the tunnel entrance. "Point that weapon away from her." Anderson stood between two wine racks with blood on his face and dust covering his suit. One officer was positioned behind him, but the angle was too dangerous for a shot. The lawyer grabbed Edith and pressed the weapon against her stomach. "Tell the officer to leave." Anderson looked at Edith. Her face was pale, and blood marked the front of her hospital gown. He raised his hand towards the officer. "Go back." The officer hesitated. "Do it." The officer slowly withdrew towards the tunnel. Barrister Williams began moving towards the staircase with Edith. "You will come with us." "Let her go." "Take me." "I need both of you." "For what?" "The evidence is already outside your control. I can still create doubt." "You confessed inside the study. The camera was destroyed. It continued recording beneath the desk." The lawyer's expression changed. Anderson had seen the small red light beneath the fallen tripod during the struggle. Whether the police recovered the footage or not, Barrister Williams could not be certain. "You are lying. Your entire system depended on making people doubt the truth. Now you have to live with doubt yourself." Barrister Williams tightened his grip around Edith. She cried out as another contraction came. Anderson stepped forward. "Step back. You need medical help for her. I need a vehicle. The police control every exit. Then you will order them to move. They will not. You are Anderson Williams. People obey you. Not anymore. That is the difference between us. I finally learned that my name should not place me above the law." Barrister Williams pulled Edith towards the staircase. At the top was a heavy metal door leading into the rear courtyard. He forced her up one step at a time. Anderson followed from a distance. The rear courtyard opened beside the ruins of an old swimming pool. Beyond the wall, a narrow path led towards the boathouse and a river once used by the family. Barrister Williams had arranged a small motorboat there, but the police already controlled the main dock. Rain began falling lightly, turning the dust into mud. Barrister Williams moved Edith towards the path. She could barely walk now. Anderson followed with his hands visible, waiting for any opportunity to separate the weapon from her. Near the wall, the lawyer's foot slipped. His grip loosened for a second. Edith drove her elbow backwards into his ribs. The gun fired. Anderson felt the bullet tear across his upper arm, spinning him sideways. He fell to one knee, but remained conscious. Edith tried to run towards him, but Barrister Williams caught the back of her gown. The fabric tore, and she fell against the wet stone. The lawyer raised the gun towards Anderson. Before he could fire again, Edith grabbed a loose piece of wood from the ground and struck his wrist. The weapon flew over the edge of the empty swimming pool. Barrister Williams turned on her with rage. Anderson tackled him from the side. Both men crashed into the broken railing surrounding the pool. The old metal gave way beneath their weight. Barrister Williams fell over the edge, but Anderson caught his wrist before he disappeared into the deep concrete structure below. For a moment, the lawyer hung above the empty pool, his feet searching for support against the wall. Anderson lay across the broken edge, his wounded arm bleeding heavily as he held a man who had murdered his father, destroyed Edith's family, and kidnapped the woman he loved. Barrister Williams looked up at him in disbelief. "Let me fall." Anderson tightened his grip despite the pain. "You deserve to face everything you did. You think saving me makes you better than your father? No. Choosing differently makes me better than you." The lawyer reached with his free hand and grabbed Anderson's injured arm. He pressed his fingers into the bullet wound. Anderson cried out but refused to release him. Barrister Williams tried to pull Anderson over the edge. "If I fall, you fall with me." Edith crawled towards them. She wrapped both hands around Anderson's belt and pulled backwards despite the pain in her stomach. "Anderson, hold on." The broken railing shifted beneath his body. Police officers entered the courtyard and rushed towards them. Two grabbed Anderson while another reached for Barrister Williams. The lawyer saw the hand extended towards him. Instead of accepting it, he tried one final time to pull Anderson down. His grip slipped. For a terrible second, Anderson believed he had lost him. An officer caught the back of the lawyer's coat before he fell and dragged him against the pool wall. Barrister Williams was pulled over the edge and forced onto the ground. The moment his body touched the courtyard, officers restrained him. He continued shouting that the Williams family would collapse without him. He claimed the officials involved in the network would destroy every witness, and that Anderson had no idea how many people depended on the secrets remaining buried. Anderson remained on the ground beside Edith, pressing his uninjured hand against her bleeding gown. "Look at me," he told her. "Stay with me. Our baby. The ambulance is coming. It hurts. I know." Her hand moved towards his bleeding arm. "You were shot. It is only my arm. You do not know that. I am fine. You always lie when you are afraid." He laughed once despite the pain, then pressed his forehead against hers. "And you always notice." The officers called for medical teams. Edith's mother reached the courtyard moments later and fell beside her daughter. She held Edith's hand while Anderson kept pressure against the bleeding. Barrister Williams was dragged past them in handcuffs. His expensive clothes were torn, his face covered in mud and blood. For the first time in decades, he no longer looked like the calm man who controlled every room. He looked like what he had always been beneath the respectable suit, a frightened criminal who had built power from other people's silence. Edith watched him pass. He looked towards her and said, "The truth will not bring your father back." Edith replied through the pain, "No, but it will stop you from taking anyone else." The medical team arrived with a stretcher. Anderson tried to stand and nearly collapsed from blood loss. An officer caught him, but he refused treatment until Edith had been placed inside the ambulance. The paramedic checked her condition and immediately called ahead to the hospital. Her contractions were close together, the bleeding had increased, and the baby's heart rate was unstable. They could not wait for a normal assessment. An emergency surgical team had to be ready before the ambulance arrived. Edith reached towards Anderson as the doors prepared to close. He climbed inside despite the paramedics' protests. "You also need another ambulance. I'm going with her. You have a gunshot wound, and she is carrying my child." The paramedic looked towards Edith. She tightened her hand around Anderson's and refused to release him. The man gave up arguing and began treating Anderson's arm while another paramedic monitored Edith and the baby. The ambulance sped away from the estate. Behind them, police secured Barrister Williams, the compromised commander, the surviving armed guard, and the injured man who had helped Edith. Officers recovered the camera from the study, the laptop, the blank memory card, and several boxes of records Barrister Williams had stored inside the mansion. The old estate, intended to become a grave for the final witnesses, became the place where the conspiracy finally collapsed. Inside the ambulance, Edith struggled to remain conscious. Anderson sat beside her with his arm bandaged, his face pale from blood loss. She whispered, "Did they arrest him?" "Yes. My mother. She is safe. She is following us." The baby's heartbeat? The paramedic looked at the monitor. "It is present, but we need to move quickly." Edith closed her eyes. Anderson touched her face. "Stay awake. I am tired. You can sleep after we reach the hospital. I do not think I can do this. You already have. What if the baby is too early? Then our child will fight. That is what our family does." She opened her eyes again. "Promise me something. Anything. If the doctors have to choose." "No." "Anderson, listen. No. They will save both of you. If they cannot, you choose the baby." "I refuse." Tears filled Edith's eyes. "Please." Anderson leaned closer. "You once tried to leave me because you believed you were protecting my future. You almost carried our child alone because you thought you were a burden. I told you then, and I am telling you now, nobody in this family is sacrificed. We fight for everyone." Edith stared at him for a long moment. Then another contraction tore through her body, and she cried out. The paramedic called the hospital again. "We are 5 minutes away." Prepare theater now. When the ambulance reached St. Catherine's Specialist Hospital, doctors were waiting outside. Edith was rushed through the emergency entrance while another team pulled Anderson towards a treatment room. He resisted until the doctor who had treated Edith earlier stepped in front of him. "Mr. Williams, she needs surgery immediately. You cannot enter the theater like this. Save her. We will do everything possible. And the baby? The child is in severe distress." Anderson looked towards Edith as the doors closed around her. She turned her head and called his name. "I am here," he shouted. "I am not leaving." The doctors moved her away. Anderson was taken into another room, where the bullet was found to have passed through the outer part of his upper arm without breaking the bone. He required stitches and blood replacement, but the injury was not life-threatening. He remained awake through the procedure and repeatedly asked for updates from Edith's theater. His mother arrived with Edith's mother. Both women had blood and dust on their clothes. Anderson's mother sat beside her son while Edith's mother paced outside the surgical wing, whispering prayers beneath her breath. Aunt Margaret remained unconscious on another floor. Sonia was still being questioned. Annabelle and Daniel were both under medical and police supervision. Every person connected to the story waited in a different room while the final innocent life at the center of the conflict fought to enter the world. After Anderson's wound was closed, he refused a hospital bed. A nurse placed his arm in a sling and helped him reach the maternity corridor. He sat beside Edith's mother beneath the same lights where he had previously waited for news of the baby's heartbeat. The operating room doors remained closed. Minutes passed, then more minutes. Anderson stared at the floor, remembering every moment that had brought them there. He remembered the first morning Edith stood beside his car and begged him to judge her driving instead of her gender. He remembered the calm way she moved through Lagos traffic, the kindness she showed an elderly cleaner, and the moment she stopped to help a stranger on the road. He remembered inviting her to dinner and discovering that nearly everything she earned supported her mother and siblings. He remembered the charity gala, the wine Annabelle deliberately spilled, and the first time he told Edith she was more than a driver. He remembered their kiss, her decision to step away because he was still engaged, and the way she forced him to become an honest man before she accepted his love. Edith had never asked for his money. She had asked him to do what was right. Now she was fighting for their child because the people around Anderson had spent years doing what was easy instead. The red light above the theater remained on. Edith's mother sat beside him. "My husband would have liked you." Anderson looked towards her. "He would have tested you first," she continued. "He tested everyone. But he would have respected the way you went back for Edith. I brought danger into her life. No, the danger was already connected to our families. You chose not to run from it. I should have protected her better. She does not need a man who believes he can control every danger. She needs a man who stands beside her when control is impossible." Anderson lowered his head. Edith's mother placed her hand over his. "Do not make the mistake I made after my husband died. I spent years believing that if I had asked more questions, searched more hospitals, or challenged the police, perhaps I could have saved him. The guilt-consumed time I should have spent remembering the life we shared. Do not turn love into punishment." The theater doors finally opened. A doctor walked into the corridor. Anderson stood so quickly that dizziness moved through him. The doctor removed his mask. "Edith is alive." Anderson closed his eyes. "And the baby?" The doctor hesitated. The entire corridor became silent. "We delivered a baby girl." Edith's mother covered her mouth. Anderson's voice broke. "Is she alive?" "She was born extremely weak. She did not breathe immediately, and the neonatal team is still working." Anderson felt the relief disappear. "Can I see Edith? She lost blood during the procedure, but we controlled it. She is unconscious and stable. What about my daughter?" The doctor looked towards the neonatal doors. "We need to wait." Anderson turned as a team rushed a tiny covered incubator past the corridor. He saw only a small hand beneath the transparent side before the doors closed again. His daughter. She looked impossibly small. He pressed his hand against the glass panel of the neonatal unit while doctors worked around the incubator. A nurse placed a mask over the baby's face. Another adjusted wires and medication. The child remained still. Anderson whispered, "Come on, baby. Your mother fought for you. Do not stop now." Behind him, Edith's mother prayed. The neonatal doctor performed another intervention. For several seconds, nothing changed. Then the baby's chest moved. A faint sound came through the unit. It was not a strong cry. It was small, fragile, and brief. But it was a cry. Anderson's knees weakened. His mother caught him as he began to fall. Tears moved freely down his face while the doctors continued stabilizing the child. The neonatal doctor later explained that the baby would need intensive care. She had been born early and had suffered repeated periods of distress during the pregnancy. The next several days would remain critical, but she was breathing with support and responding to treatment. Anderson asked whether he could touch her. After he changed into protective clothing and washed carefully, a nurse allowed him inside. He stood beside the incubator, afraid his hand was too large even to approach her. The baby's fingers moved weakly. Anderson placed one finger through the access opening. Her hand closed around it. He began crying again. "Hello, my little fighter," he whispered. "I am your father. I know you've already had a difficult beginning, but your mother and I are here. You will never carry anything alone." Hours later, Edith woke in recovery. Her first words were about the baby. Anderson sat beside her with his injured arm in a sling. "Our daughter is alive." Edith's eyes filled with tears. "A daughter?" He nodded. "She is small and stubborn, like you. No, she is beautiful and strong. That came from you. Can I see her?" "As soon as the doctor allows it." "Is she breathing?" "With help." Edith closed her eyes and cried silently. Anderson leaned close and kissed her forehead. "She held my finger." A weak smile appeared on Edith's face. "Then she already controls you." "She controlled me before she was born." Edith noticed his bandaged arm. "You said the bullet only touched you. It passed through." "That is not touching. I did not want you worried. You are a terrible liar, and you still love me." Unfortunately, they both laughed softly despite the pain surrounding them. A few hours later, Edith was taken in a wheelchair to the neonatal unit. Anderson pushed her slowly, while her mother and Anderson's mother followed. The moment Edith saw the baby inside the incubator, she covered her mouth. Her daughter's body was surrounded by wires, but her chest moved steadily. Edith placed her hand through the opening. The baby's fingers curled around her skin. "My baby," Edith whispered. "You stayed." Anderson stood behind her. "She promised to wait for us." Edith looked up at him. "What should we call her?" They had never reached a final decision because every conversation about the future had been interrupted by another crisis. Anderson looked towards the child. "Grace." Edith repeated the name quietly. "Grace Johnson Williams," Anderson continued. "For the grace that kept her alive, and for the grandfather whose courage brought us the truth." Edith began crying again, but this time the tears carried something other than fear. "Grace Johnson Williams," she said. "That is her name." While Edith and Anderson remained with their daughter, the investigation moved rapidly. The camera recovered from the estate study had recorded Barrister Williams admitting that Anderson's father's medication had been manipulated. It also captured his plan to force Anderson into a false confession and stage the deaths inside the mansion. The recording device beneath Anderson's collar had stored audio locally even after the signal jammer blocked transmission. It preserved the lawyer's statements about Officer Johnson, the protection network, and the murder of Anderson's father. The compromised police commander's phone contained messages directing officers away from evidence locations, altering reports, and warning Barrister Williams whenever the investigation moved too close. The armed contractors admitted they had been paid to destroy the false storage property and assist with Edith's abduction. The nervous guard survived the gunshot. His decision to help Edith and his testimony about the planned murders became important evidence. Although he still faced consequences for participating in the kidnapping, investigators recognized that he had refused the final order and risked his life protecting hostages. Barrister Williams was placed under heavy guard. He attempted to present himself as the victim of a powerful family trying to blame its lawyer, but the recordings, financial documents, and witness statements were too extensive. For the first time, his ability to create doubt was weaker than the truth surrounding him. Aunt Margaret regained consciousness 2 days later. Anderson visited her after the doctors confirmed she was stable. Margaret looked smaller and older beneath the hospital sheets. The confident woman who once understood every family conversation now struggled to meet his eyes. She apologized for involving his name in the cover-up. Anderson asked why she obeyed Barrister Williams for so many years. Margaret explained that after Officer Johnson died, the lawyer showed her the forged documents carrying Anderson's signature. He warned that if the truth appeared, Anderson would be accused of ordering the clinic delay and using Williams' holdings to destroy evidence. Margaret believed silence protected her nephew. Over time, she understood that Barrister Williams had manipulated her. However, every year of silence made confession more difficult. She watched Edith enter Anderson's life and recognized Officer Johnson's surname immediately. At first, she considered arranging another driver, but guilt stopped her. Then she saw how Edith's kindness changed Anderson. Margaret admitted that encouraging their relationship was partly selfish. She wanted to believe that if Edith found happiness with Anderson, some balance would return to the harm caused by the Williams name. Anderson told her love was not compensation. "I know," Margaret replied. "I tried to repay a truth that could only be honored by speaking it. Why did you say my father controlled the network? Because he created the fund and ignored what it became. For years, I told myself Barrister Williams was the real criminal, and your father was only deceived. But your father saw suspicious settlements and chose not to examine them because the company benefited. By the time he tried to end the system, Officer Johnson was already in danger. Your father did not order his death, but he helped create the protection that made it possible." Anderson accepted the distinction. His father had not been innocent. He had tolerated corruption until it threatened to destroy the family rather than strangers. Yet when he finally attempted to expose it, Barrister Williams killed him. Margaret asked whether Edith could ever forgive her. "That is not a question I can answer for her. I do not deserve forgiveness." "Perhaps not, but you still owe her the complete truth." Margaret agreed to give a full statement. She provided names, old account numbers, and details about meetings between Barrister Williams, Annabelle's father, and the police commander. Her testimony connected several unsolved accident cases to the same network. Edith later visited Margaret in a wheelchair. The meeting was quiet and painful. Margaret tried to apologize, but Edith stopped her. "My mother spent years waiting for an explanation. My siblings grew up without their father. I worked because our family had no choice. You watched all of that happen while carrying the truth." Margaret began to cry. "I was afraid. My father was afraid too. He still tried to do what was right. I cannot change what I did." "No, you cannot." Margaret lowered her eyes. Edith continued, "I do not know whether I can forgive you today. Perhaps I never will in the way you want. But I refuse to allow your choices to fill the rest of my life with hatred." Margaret looked up. "You will face the law," Edith said. "You will tell every family what happened. You will not hide behind Anderson or your age or the fact that you eventually helped us. That is the only apology that matters now." Margaret agreed. Sonia also gave a complete statement. She admitted processing the forged payment, deleting records, and monitoring Edith after recognizing Officer Johnson's name. Although Barrister Williams had controlled and threatened her, Sonia accepted that fear did not erase her responsibility. Anderson met her once before formal charges were filed. She apologized for betraying him. "You sat outside my office for years," Anderson said. "You knew where I went, who I trusted, and when Edith was alone. How many times did you consider telling me? More times than I can count. And every time you chose your position." "Yes. Why give us the flash drive? Because when I saw Edith in the hospital, I realized the past was no longer buried. It was repeating itself. Officer Johnson was denied treatment to protect us, and Edith was being threatened for searching for him. I knew silence would make me part of another death." Anderson did not offer forgiveness, but he thanked her for finally preserving the evidence. He assured her that the legal process would determine the consequences, not private revenge. Annabelle's case continued separately. After Barrister Williams' arrest, she understood that the powerful network she expected to protect her had collapsed. Her father's old arrangements and her own actions were exposed. She agreed to cooperate in exchange for consideration during sentencing, though the hospital attack, DNA fraud, and harassment remained serious charges. Daniel's paternity was confirmed through a new independent test. He admitted his role in hiding the original accident and accepting money. He also requested the opportunity to take responsibility for his child after birth. The court would eventually decide what contact was appropriate, but Daniel began by accepting that fatherhood required more than claiming a baby after the truth became convenient. Annabelle gave birth months later, while still under legal supervision. The child was healthy. For the first time, she could no longer use uncertainty about the father as a weapon. Daniel's name appeared on the verified report, and arrangements were made to protect the baby from the public consequences of the parents' actions. Edith insisted the child should never be punished for Annabelle's crimes. Anderson quietly established medical support through an independent trust with no conditions attached. He did not visit Annabelle and did not allow the assistance to become another connection she could manipulate. He helped because the baby was innocent, exactly as Edith had reminded him. The investigation into Williams' holdings became public. Anderson's board advised him to deny responsibility, and present Barrister Williams is a rogue lawyer who acted without company knowledge. Public relations consultants warned that admitting the truth could destroy contracts, reduce the company's value, and cause investors to leave. Anderson rejected their strategy. He held a press conference with Edith's approval. Standing before cameras with his injured arm still recovering, he acknowledged that his father created an emergency fund that later became a system for hiding serious crimes. He admitted that Williams' holdings benefited from private settlements and failed to examine suspicious payments. He made clear that Barrister Williams controlled the criminal network, but he refused to use one guilty man as an excuse for the company's institutional failures. An organization does not become innocent simply because its leaders avoided asking questions, Anderson said. My family's name was used to silence victims, alter records, and protect people with wealth. Some members of my family acted directly. Others benefited from not knowing. Today, Williams Holdings accepts responsibility for opening every archive, compensating affected families, and cooperating fully with the investigation. The admission caused immediate financial damage. Several directors resigned. Investors sold shares, and newspapers questioned whether the company would survive. Anderson did not change his position. He created an independent compensation program overseen by people outside the Williams family. Every accident connected to the old protection network was reopened. Families who had been ignored for years finally received access to medical records, financial support, and legal representation. The original emergency fund was replaced by the Officer Johnson Road Justice Foundation. Its purpose was not to settle cases quietly, but to support accident victims, preserve evidence, and ensure emergency treatment could never be delayed because of status or payment. Edith's mother attended the announcement. When reporters asked whether money could compensate for her husband's death, she answered that no amount could return him. The foundation mattered only if it prevented another family from receiving the same knock on the door. Williams Holdings lost part of its empire, but it did not collapse. Employees who feared losing their jobs watched Anderson sell personal properties and family investments before allowing ordinary workers to suffer. He reduced executive bonuses, removed corrupt directors, and rebuilt the transport division under independent supervision. Over time, the company's honesty became more valuable than the reputation Barrister Williams had tried to protect through murder. Grace remained in neonatal care for several weeks. Every day, Anderson and Edith sat beside her incubator. Anderson attended board meetings through a laptop from the hospital family room, but he ended every call the moment Grace moved or Edith needed him. Edith slowly recovered from the surgery. She learned how to hold Grace through the incubator openings and later against her chest during supervised care. The first time Grace breathed without mechanical support, Anderson recorded the moment and watched it repeatedly. The day the doctors finally allowed them to take her home, Anderson arrived with an entire security convoy. Edith looked through the hospital window and shook her head. Anderson, we're taking one baby home, not transporting a head of state. She is more important than any head of state. She will grow up believing traffic stops for her. It should. Edith laughed. You have already spoiled her. I bought only the necessary things. His mother opened the door to the hospital room and revealed several bags, toys, and an expensive child seat. Edith stared at him. Anderson looked away. Some things may not have been completely necessary. They returned to the mansion, but it no longer felt like the same house Annabelle had entered. Anderson redesigned the security system, yet Edith refused to allow fear to dominate their home. The main sitting room where she collapsed was changed into a bright family space filled with photographs, plants, and sunlight. A framed picture of Officer Johnson stood near the entrance. Anderson placed his father's photograph in a private study instead of the central family hall. He did not erase the man from his life, but he stopped treating the family legacy as something too sacred to question. His father's mistakes became part of the truth Anderson intended to teach Grace one day. Months passed. Barrister Williams' trial attracted national attention. The recordings from the estate and memory card formed the center of the case. The surviving guard testified about the planned murders. Margaret, Sonia, Daniel, and Annabelle all provided evidence from different parts of the network. The compromised police commander's messages connected the lawyer to altered investigations and destroyed records. Barrister Williams attempted to claim that every witness had been pressured by Anderson. The argument weakened when independent forensic experts confirmed the age and authenticity of the recordings made by Anderson's father. The court found the lawyer responsible for leading the conspiracy, arranging Officer Johnson's death through delayed treatment, causing Anderson's father's death, kidnapping Edith and her mother, attempting to murder Anderson, and organizing years of evidence manipulation. As he was taken away, Barrister Williams looked towards Anderson. He expected satisfaction, but Anderson's face remained calm. The lawyer said, "Your company will never become what your father wanted." Anderson replied, "That is the first good thing you have said." Margaret and Sonia also faced legal consequences for their roles. Their cooperation reduced some penalties but did not erase them. Anderson did not interfere. He visited Margaret occasionally because she remained family, but he never used wealth to remove accountability. Edith eventually told Margaret that forgiveness would be a long process, not one emotional conversation. Margaret accepted this. She spent her remaining time helping investigators identify other victims and writing personal apologies to the families whose cases she helped hide. Daniel accepted responsibility for remaining silent after Officer Johnson's accident. He also entered a legal process concerning his daughter. Edith did not excuse him, but she acknowledged that his hidden key had preserved the path towards the truth. Annabelle's pride did not disappear immediately. During early hearings, she continued blaming Anderson and Edith for her downfall. However, the absence of people willing to protect her slowly forced her to face reality. Her child grew under the care of relatives approved by the court while Annabelle worked through the consequences of her decisions. One day, she wrote Edith a letter. She admitted that she entered the mansion intending to frighten her. She confessed that she made the hospital call knowing emotional shock could harm the pregnancy. She did not ask for forgiveness. For the first time, she wrote without claiming that Anderson had been stolen from her. Edith read the letter once and placed it inside the legal file. Anderson asked whether she wanted to respond. "No." "Are you angry?" "Yes." "Do you think you will forgive her?" "I do not know." Forgiveness does not mean giving someone access to your life again. Anderson nodded. Edith looked towards Grace sleeping in her crib. "My peace is here. I do not need Annabelle to understand it." 1 year after Grace's birth, Anderson finally returned to the promise he made before everything collapsed. He wanted to marry Edith. He offered to organize the largest wedding in Lagos, but Edith refused immediately. She did not want politicians, business partners, or strangers attending because of Anderson's name. She wanted the people who had stood beside them when the name meant nothing. The ceremony took place in the garden of Edith's mother's home. Anderson paid to restore the property, but he followed Edith's instruction to keep the celebration simple. White flowers lined the path. Grace sat in Anderson's mother's arms, and a photograph of Officer Johnson rested near the front row. Aunt Margaret attended under legal permission, walking slowly with support. She remained at the back and did not expect recognition. Edith's mother noticed her and gave a small nod. It was not complete forgiveness, but it was the first sign that healing might one day become possible. Anderson stood beneath the flowers wearing a simple dark suit. He looked more nervous than he had during any business negotiation. When Edith appeared, the guests became silent. She wore an elegant dress without heavy jewelry. Her braids were pulled back, and she carried a small photograph of her father beside the flowers in her hands. Anderson watched her walk towards him and remembered the first day she arrived wearing a chauffeur's uniform, asking for 1 week to prove herself. Edith reached him and smiled. "You look frightened." "I am. You negotiated with armed kidnappers. This is more serious." She laughed softly. During his vows, Anderson did not promise to give Edith the whole world. He had once believed love meant providing everything money could buy. His life with Edith taught him something different. I promise to tell you the truth, even when the truth makes me look weak, he said. I promise to listen before I try to solve. I promise never to use protection as an excuse for control. I cannot guarantee that life will remain easy, but I promise you will never face it alone. Edith's eyes filled with tears. Her vows were equally simple. You first entered my life as my employer. Then you became the person who believed in me when the world saw only a driver. I promise to stand beside you, not behind you. I promise to remind you when you are becoming impossible, which may happen often. I promise to love the man you choose to be, not the wealth or name surrounding you. Anderson smiled. That part about being impossible was not necessary. It was the most honest part. The guests laughed. When they exchanged rings, Grace began crying in the front row. Anderson's mother tried to calm her, but Edith held out her arms. The ceremony paused while Grace was brought to them. Anderson held his daughter between himself and Edith, as they were pronounced husband and wife. Their first kiss as a married couple happened with Grace reaching towards both their faces. Later, after the guests had eaten and the music softened, Anderson led Edith towards a covered vehicle near the house. She looked suspicious. What have you done? Nothing excessive. That sentence always means something excessive. He removed the cover. Beneath it was a beautifully restored version of the first luxury car Edith had driven for him. The vehicle had been rebuilt and painted, but the interior still carried the design she remembered. Edith walked around it slowly. I thought this car was sold. I bought it back. Why? Because this is where my life changed. She opened the driver's door. Anderson moved towards the opposite side. I thought I would drive today. Edith looked at him. Why would you do that? I am your husband, and I am still the better driver. He could not argue with that. Edith sat behind the steering wheel, while Anderson secured Grace inside the child's seat. He then sat beside Edith in the front instead of taking his old place in the rear. She started the engine. Anderson looked at her. Where are we going? Home. As the car moved away from the garden, Edith's mother watched from the gate. Anderson's mother stood beside her, and Aunt Margaret remained a respectful distance behind them. Edith drove through the quiet streets with Anderson beside her and Grace sleeping safely in the back. For years, people had defined Edith by the seat she occupied. To Anderson's employees, she had been a chauffeur. To Annabelle, she had been a common driver who forgot her position. To wealthy strangers, she had been someone who did not belong beside a billionaire. But Edith had never been ashamed of driving. Her father taught her that a good driver did more than control a vehicle. A driver remained calm when others panicked, saw danger before it arrived, and understood that every person inside the car depended on her judgment. Edith had driven Anderson through crowded roads, emotional storms, and a truth powerful people spent years trying to bury. She had not entered his life to enjoy his fortune. She had taught him how to become worthy of it. Anderson reached across the console and placed his hand over hers. Mrs. Williams. Yes. Thank you. For what? For not giving up on me. Edith smiled without taking her eyes from the road. You made it extremely difficult. I know. Anderson. Yes. No more secrets. No more secrets. From the back seat, Grace made a small sound in her sleep. Edith glanced at her through the mirror. The child who had nearly been lost before she was born now rested peacefully between the two families her arrival had helped heal. The road ahead was open. For the first time, nobody was following them. Nobody was waiting with another threat. Nobody was using an unborn child, a family name, or a hidden report to control their future. Anderson was no longer sitting in the back while someone else decided where his life would go. He was beside the woman he loved. Edith pressed the accelerator gently, carrying her husband and daughter towards the home they had fought to build. Sometimes love arrived quietly, not inside a business agreement, not through wealth, status, or a famous family name. Sometimes it arrived behind the steering wheel, wearing a simple uniform and asking for one chance to prove its worth. And sometimes the person hired to drive your car became the person who finally showed you the road home. Subscribe now for the next part. And turn on notifications so don't miss the next chapter, which will be uploaded soon.